towards in New York City. Just based off of what I'm hearing, because I'm not a local girl here in terms of following everything tooth and nail. Is every election as confusing?
I'll kick it to someone.
Should I take a stab at that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Over the last, should we say, 10 years, there have been enough changes in Ohio's election laws that it has been confusing. We had problems, if you go back in the year 2000 and 2004, and then there were changes to address those problems. There were additional changes proposed by the legislature. It would be very nice if we could have election laws that stayed the same. But living in Ohio, I think that's probably a dream.
Yeah. I would just add one thing, and I think that something that's been confusing every election cycle is what the deal is with provisional ballots in Ohio. You may know about the case that was recently won by SEIU and others in the Civil District in Ohio, which basically found, that there's a rule in Ohio under an Ohio Supreme Court case, which basically found that if a voter casts their ballot in a wrong precinct but in the right polling location, then that provisional ballot is disqualified and that vote will not count. So you're talking about a poll worker handing somebody the wrong provisional ballot and that being, basically tossed aside. So I think that the provisional ballot laws in Ohio are tremendously confusing. I think this is sort of this well known in the state, but I think that this is an issue that voters deal with every cycle. Just with the provisional ballot, the wrong precinct provisional ballot issue, half of the provisional ballots that are tossed for the reason that they were cast in the wrong precinct at no fault of the voter. And in addition, I think there's 13 reasons why a voter casts, provisional ballot in Ohio, and that's, Ohio has one of the highest rates of provisional ballots in the state, and also one of the highest, in the country, and also one of the highest rates of rejection in the country, despite their population of 11 million people. They're second, I think, to California, which has 3 times the size of voting age population in Ohio. So that's one consistent confusion, I think, that arises every election cycle.
And I would just like to add that while all of the talk of changes can be very confusing, voting really can be and should be a very simple process. In Ohio, absentee voting is actually extremely simple. The fact that a lot of voters don't realize this, but if you just go in to vote early in person or vote by mail, all you have to do is provide the last 4 digits of your social or your Ohio driver's license number. So that right there cuts through a lot of red tape, confusion, people not having the right forms of ID. So in that case, we're extremely fortunate in Ohio, and I really hope that we can get that message across to voters that they shouldn't be confused or dismayed by all of the talk of changes, that it really is simple to vote once they are able to get that good information that we're hoping to be able to push.
What's the most prevalent problem you encounter on election day when people are calling your hotline and they're coming up to you at a polling place? What is the biggest problem?
Actually, the biggest volume of calls that we get is not technically a problem. They're inquiries. People want to verify their voter registration status. People want to know whether they're properly registered. People want to know where to vote. I'm sorry about that. And people want to know where their polling location is. And as I mentioned earlier, I think we're going to have even more calls to that degree because of the precinct consolidations and polling place cuts that have been happening in most of the major counties. Also, there's a lot of confusion with respect to people who move. Urban counties, a lot of the voting age population, they tend to be more mobile than in some of the more rural areas. So there are different rules that apply to whether you move within a precinct, you move to another precinct within the county, or if you move to another county. So people are confused. They don't know where they're supposed to be voting or what their requirements are. So that's also a big problem.
Is that why you targeted those 5 high-population counties?
It's a matter of resources, right? So, we rely on our in-state partners to carry out, the program. They do an amazing job. But, we're only as as good as where our volunteers are. So that's why we target the biggest counties because they have the most voters, they have the most multiple precinct polling locations, and we also try to focus on areas that have high minority concentration because they tend to be the most disenfranchised. They tend to have less voter services, and also there also tend to be the locations where we get most of the reports in, and I'm sure that's a function of where the hotline is being advertised. Mostly it's going to be advertised in these areas, so it's really a matter of resource allocation. Ideally, we would love to expand the program to some more rural communities in Ohio because I'm sure voters face issues there in the voting process.
Voters in any county can call the hotline. They just may not. We just may not have someone monitoring their polling locations. I guess that should be clear. Like anybody in any of the 88 counties can call 866-OUR-VOTE and get assistance from a nonpartisan trained volunteer on election day. The counties targeted will just have trained volunteers sort of rotating hotspot polling locations.
Any other questions?
How much responsibility do voters have in all this? I mean, the requirements are pretty clear. The Secretary of State and others have made a point of saying, go check your registration address, make sure everything's up to date before October 9th. You can go online, check your polling place. How much responsibility is on them as opposed to, somebody trying to suppress somebody's vote?
Well, I think voters have a lot of responsibility to, make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain. But the election administration authorities have the responsibility to make sure that they're not putting up unnecessary barriers to folks. I mean, we do need to recognize that seniors, other people have need certain help getting over barriers that other people may not need help getting over. And so we need to have a system that works for everybody. I mean, that's what it's all about. This is the one day everybody's equal. And we need to make sure that we really live that on election day.
Any other questions?